take us through that transition of the last 8 years, because it strikes me it's not just we added a lot of digital subscribers. There also is a fundamental shift in the business model because the New York Times has always been based largely on advertising.
Hi, David. Yeah. So what we decided to do, there were 4 revenue streams when I arrived at the company, still are today. Print advertising, which once had been more than 80% of the total revenue of the company had been print advertising, print subscription, digital advertising, and digital subscription. And really, my kind of BDI narrowed in on digital subscription as the revenue stream we should really grow, and indeed had to grow, because ultimately, for different reasons, all of the other revenue streams, it seemed to me, were in trouble potentially, and ultimately might even disappear. So we doubled down on the very simple idea of great journalism packaged effectively in good digital products, which establish a very close relationship with people who are prepared to pay to get that journalism, and that becoming really the bedrock of the entire future of the company. And to do that, we invested in our newsroom. We actually built the newsroom. We've got 250 more journalists now than when I walked into the building. And we also got smart about digital product. We hired hundreds of software engineers and data scientists, machine learning people, and graphic designers and videographers, and really worked on the digital product. And we've ended up with a kind of virtuous circle where I think the content is as rich and broad as it's ever been. It's much more effectively packaged up in products, and people are flocking to buy the products as new subscribers.
So, Mark, you describe it as simple, but it was far from conventional wisdom when you took over. I mean, most newspaper people, as you and I both know, in the United States had said, look, we made the mistake early on of making this free on the internet. There's no way we can charge with it, with the possible exception of the Financial Times, maybe the Wall Street Journal, because it's especially business publication. So what you did may have been simple, but it was not what most people thought would work.
That's true of our industry, but if you step back, I mean, Reed Hastings was thinking the same thought about high quality TV in relation to Netflix. Daniel Ek and co at Spotify were thinking the same about music, that there was a way of getting great entertainment or great music to the world's public, and enough people out there would pay for it to make a great business. And really, all we're really doing, I think we're part of a broader trend towards direct digital subscription relationships with people who want really good stuff. And that's an entire sector which is growing very rapidly. And in a way, it's a little bit like the moment when cable TV arrived in the US. And suddenly there was a choice of something beyond regular broadcast TV television. And I think that although it's true that the broadcast model is happening to broadcast TV right now is post-growth and is going to be very difficult to sustain even its current level, it turns out these other forms of getting TV and music and news could grow. There was once a really big market in paid news in America, and it wasn't just the New York Times. It was local newspapers, it was metros, it was magazines and all that. People paid billions and billions of dollars as subscribers and buying these products from newsstands. There's no reason why that market can't be recaptured, it seems to me.
But how would that happen, Mark, as a practical matter? Because when you came in, the New York Times still had a very robust newsroom, directed toward print largely, but very robust newsroom. A lot of newspapers across the country, these are regional as well as local papers, really have had to cut back so far. They've let those newsrooms go. Is it possible at this point to rebuild that? Can your model apply beyond the New York Times, I guess is what I'm asking.
And the answer is, because so few people have even tried it, I don't think we know. But to me, I mean, I think there's one basic big caveat, which is this is a kind of horse and buggy to automobile moment. And that requires capital. You have to risk some money, you have to invest to make the change. But assuming someone wants to invest, I don't see at all why, if you rehire your journalists, rebuild that newsroom, start doing great reporting, and start getting smart about how you get it to the public, why you can't really build a new business. I think the mistake made was thinking that you could kind of eke your way to the digital future without putting any fresh money in. And no one could do that. Nobody could take a kind of horse carriage factory and turn it into a car company without vast fresh investment. And This is one of those periods in media which is very capital intensive. It requires lots of money. But for people who are prepared to put the money in, I think there are great businesses to be built.
But the other thing we saw was people take a look at Facebook and Google and say they're so massive, their audience is so large, we have no choice but to go through them. We have to hitch our wagon to them, even though they will have the direct relationship with our subscriber, our customer. I mean, even New York Times flirted with that for a time. So is it possible for people to do this directly? I mean, you have a direct relation to the subscriber.
And we believe that although digital social media, Facebook and the rest of it, Google search, and all of these platforms are really important in people finding our content, hearing about the Times and making sure our journalism is really influential, that we really needed a kind of trail of breadcrumbs from these other platforms back to the mothership, back to the New York Times experience. And we need to get smart about guiding people. So even if they heard about us, found about us, read their first pieces on these platforms, more and more they'd come to us. And to your broader point, I want to say that a few years ago, recorded music went through a very similar kind of complete crisis of confidence and assumed that other people, they worried about Apple, they worried about pirates, they worried about YouTube and so on. Other people, in the end, were so powerful they couldn't rebuild their business. But about 2 or 3 years ago, I think 2017, the global recorded music industry started growing its revenue again. Hasn't got back to its peak yet, but that's now looking like a strong industry. And there's no reason why the news industry can't bottom out and start rebuilding. But it requires you to have faith in the public, believe that people out there really want quality. And you have to, I'm afraid, it's quite tough, I think, for the industry. You have to reach for your pocketbook and actually invest.
Mark, what do you make of the efforts by some governments now to get into the game? You see what's going on in Australia, where Australia essentially is moving in the direction of requiring Facebook to pay a license fee to newspapers. And it appears that Europe may not be too far behind. Do you think that's a wise move?
Well, I want to say, I'm going to give you, I'm afraid, a slightly kind of two-handed answer. On the one hand, I do think that trying to strike a deal, I think preferably a commercial deal rather than one which is forced on everyone by regulators and by politicians, but a deal whereby the big platforms do recognize the value they get from the content we all make, and that's reflected in payments. I think that in principle is actually a good thing. Honestly, I do think there's a real value transfer, and it should be acknowledged. I worry about putting more power in the hands of regulators and politicians. This is a moment in world history where governments everywhere are rather greedy to get their hands on media. It's all the media's fault. We really need to control the media. We need to help them understand what they really should be doing. And if you give them control over the purse strings as well, albeit via regulators and legislation, I worry about unintended consequences. The real trouble with regulatory intervention and new laws is inevitably they're drafted by politicians. They're inevitably out of date by the time they're signed, and the risk is unintended consequences. But I also do think that there is a political reckoning coming, and the major platforms, I think, would be well advised to work with publishers like the New York Times to try and find a better way through a voluntary commercial relationship.
Mark, we do have an election coming up this fall. You may have noticed.
I've heard that.
Exactly. And I wonder what you think about covering this election. I mean, these have gotten more and more partisan, more and more divided in this country. You come from Great Britain, and certainly the BBC really tries to be neutral, even though the government may not always agree that it's neutral. But on the other hand, you have newspapers that are decidedly partisan. Is there still room for an impartial newspaper here? Let's be honest. Some people think the New York Times already has moved left of center.
Well, in its opinion pages, and in particular in its editorials, the New York Times does host opinions and its own editorials, its leader columns, as it were, the opinion of the New York Times, or at least its editorial board, does definitely lean left. In its news pages, it strives to be very objective. But and you know this as well as I do, to someone who's got very strong political opinions, who's got a very clear ideology, impartial looks partial. Impartial looks like it's hostile because it's not agreeing with everything you believe and you say. And the truth is, when politics are very polarized, almost no one wants impartial news. What they really want is news which helps their side. Um, my view is we just have to be patient. This is a moment in American political history, a very similar moment, some differences, but essentially much of the same trends are playing out in the UK and most other European countries that I know of. I think we have to stick to our guns. I think in the end, impartial truth, actual facts, a real perspective on what's happening is more valuable than versions of the news which favor, one side, hide stuff which is awkward or embarrassing for that side. I think that stuff in the end, it's quite entertaining. It may pat you on the back if you've got very strong political views of one sort or the other. It doesn't really help you understand the world. And in the end, I think the truth wins. So my view is batten down the hatches. It's going to be a very bumpy few months, I think. This is an election which may not be decided on election night. It may drag on for days, weeks, even months because of postal votes, and because I'm one of those people who think it's going to be an unbelievably tight election probably by the time we get there. But I think what you have to do as a professional, independent, impartial journalist, and that's what I used to be and still am really under the skin. I think you just have to do your job, try and remain as objective as you can, strive to be as fair as you can to everyone, and report what you see.